Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Erin Bedore-Kayem, and I am a healthcare professional who is going to talk a little bit today about some of the mental health aspects of the coronavirus and the epidemic that we're going through right now. I have a guest speaker with me today, Dr. Mark Kayem, and he is first going to discuss with you at great length some of the different pieces about the COVID-19 in terms of how we can manage this, where we got it from, some really good information that will help to put your minds at ease and help us move together as a community to support each other and really get through this difficult time. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Kayem right now, and he will speak to you for a little while, and then I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about some of the mental health aspects of this pandemic that we're going through. So here's Dr. Kayem.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me. So my name is Dr. Mark Kayem. I'm an ear, nose, and throat specialist practicing in Beverly Hills, Mammoth Lakes, Las Vegas, and the Cayman Islands. And I'm sure that you, as everybody else, has been overwhelmed with emails and information and news about coronavirus. It's pretty much everything that's in the news right now. You've probably already watched every single show on Netflix because you're stuck at home and know that work, school, businesses, many places have been closed because of this. So the idea of this discussion is just to explain to people what coronavirus is and really to try to eliminate some of the misconceptions and wrong information that's been going out there and that's been leading to some feelings of panic. Now, according to the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, as of today, March 15, 2020, there are 69 cases in all of LA County, and that includes Long Beach and Pasadena. So that's 69 cases for, 15 million people? And so the chance of being exposed to it at this point today still remains very low. We need to remain alert. We need to know how to prevent it. But at this point, the chance that the person next to you, the supermarket, has it is still very low. Now, it's important to understand that the situation is very fluid. There's a lot of change going on. In medicine, if we're evaluating a disease and we look at a journal and we find an article from a year ago, that's considered cutting edge. That's up to date and that's new. Well, things have changed. With COVID-19, things are changing from day to day, and information from 48 hours ago may not be accurate anymore. So it really requires a lot of evaluating information from places like the CDC, Public Health, the World Health Organization, and really seeing what is the appropriate way to respond to this threat. So I'm going to start by the name COVID-19. What does it mean? Well, the CO stands for corona, the V for virus, and the ID19 for when it was diagnosed. It was identified in December 2019. So this was, as most of you know, found in China, and it was diagnosed at the end of December 2019, which is just a few months ago. And it has progressed very quickly since then. Now, people are wondering, why is it called corona? It's the appearance on an electron microscope. It's a circle with these little spikes coming out of it that make it look like a crown. Now, most of us now are looking at the computerized 3D version, which shows you the sphere with these little spikes, but looking at it, you need dimensionally, on 2 dimensions, it looks like a little crown. So that's where the corona name came from. And corona is not new. They've been around for years and years. There were decades ago other types of coronaviruses that came out and infected humans and caused a lot of problems. Question is also, where did it come from? Right now, the thought it was probably contained in bat stools from bat caves found in China. And it's thought that this was somehow transmitted to other animals and that people who tried to clean the ground with a water jet aerosolized it, where it went up in the air and it was breathed in, and this is how the humans got it. An important point about the COVID-19 virus is the incubation period. Now, the incubation period is described as the time between when someone is actually exposed to the disease and when they develop symptoms. According to the current research, that time averages about 4 or 5 days. Now, it can be as short as 2 days and as long as 14 days in rare cases, but for most people, the duration of the incubation period, when people carry it but haven't shown any symptoms yet, so don't know they're sick, is about 4 or 5 days. It is usually transmitted either by direct contact or by inhalation of what we call aerosolized virus. Aerosolized virus means that it's been brought up in the air and it's still hanging in the air, but it's important to understand it doesn't survive for very long in the air. It's not considered airborne. Tuberculosis was airborne. Tuberculosis, someone could walk into a room hours after someone else was there and breathe it in and catch it. This is not the same way. If people cough, the little droplets will be in the air for a short period of time, maybe minutes or hours, and so eventually they'll settle down. And so it's unlikely that people will catch it just by breathing it in. Much more likely that they'll catch it from contact, either from their hands to their mouth or their eyes or scratching their nose. And this is where the importance of washing your hands is so important. There's also a question about how long does it survive on its own? Well, in the lab, if coronavirus is applied to a dry surface, say stainless steel, for example, it's felt that it'll last for a few hours, probably 3 hours or around there. However, that is not necessarily the way things are in real life. If the virus is surrounded by mucus or what we would call organic material, it's going to live a lot longer. And as an example, if someone, say, coughs on a shopping cart and there's a piece of mucus with a virus in it, well, that virus might survive for much longer than a few hours. It's also important, for example, the dryness. If it's extremely dry air, it's more likely that it will dry up and kill the virus. If it's very humid, that mucus might stay there longer and the virus will survive longer. So let's take an example. If you're at the supermarket and the person before you is one of those 69 people out of 14 million who has the COVID-19 virus, and they cough on the cart and you put your hands on it. Are you going to get it? No, not yet. If you're careful and you wash your hands as soon as you're done with your shopping, you don't have to worry about it. If you went in with an alcohol wipe and you wipe down the handlebar, you shouldn't have any problems either. But if you're not careful and after grabbing that rail, you scratch your nose or you get an itch in your eyes and you rub your eye, then there's a possibility that you might get it. And this is where the scary exponential growth has occurred. In very tight circles where people are close to each other, it's much easier to catch it. So this is why people are talking about social distancing, trying to keep 5 or 6 feet away from other people. If they cough, if they have the disease and they cough and you're right next to them and you walk into it shortly within, say, minutes afterwards, yes, there's a chance that you might catch it. But again, it's still extremely remote in California. We don't know where it's going to be tomorrow or next week. If it continues to do what it's done in Europe, it could be disastrous. But as of now, people really shouldn't panic because the risk of getting it are still extremely remote. Another question people ask, can pets transmit it? Well, currently it's thought that no, that home pets, domestic animals, very unlikely to either get the disease or even transmit the disease. The next question, well, what are the symptoms? Well, symptoms include coughing, some shortness of breath, and fever. Now, these are the most common ones. Fever being the biggest one. Fever, about almost 90% of people who are infected with the COVID-19 virus will have a fever when they're past the incubation period. Initially, there's no symptoms. That's the incubation period. But after those average 4 or 5 days, that's when people can start getting the symptoms, and fever is one of the most common ones. Actually, it is the most common one, followed by a dry cough in about 2/3 of people, and then fatigue in a little bit over 1/3 of people, sputum production and mucus on coughing in about 33% of people, and shortness of breath about 20%, sore throat about 15%, headaches a little bit under 15%, and then other muscle aches or joint pains about 15%. Chills about 11%, nausea and vomiting about 5% of people, and then nasal blockage 5%, diarrhea about 4%. So it really, fever and dry cough and fatigue are the most common symptoms that people can present with. Now, say you are exposed to disease, you go through the incubation period, and then you get sick on it. Well, 80% of people will have a mild case of the infection. They will not need to go to see, well, they might go see the doctor, but they won't need to be hospitalized. They might go see the doctor and say, I'm coughing, I've got fever, I have a bad cold. They're infectious, other people could catch it, but 80% will not progress to more severe phase of the disease. Now, about 15% will have what we call moderate to severe disease. They might require hospitalization, they might need oxygen, they may even need to be hospitalized for prolonged periods. So that leaves 5% with the severe disease. Those are the people that need to be in the intensive care units, might need to have a breathing tube down their throat, might need to be on oxygen. And out of that 5%, the mortality rate currently is about 2 or 3%. Now, does that mean that if you get it, will you have a 2% chance of dying? No, no. If you're a healthy young person and you take care of yourself and you don't have any medical problems, the chance of dying is much less than 1%, probably less than 0.1%. On the other hand, if you're 85 years old and have kidney failure, you're on dialysis, and you've got other medical problems, diabetes, for example, the mortality rate might be 20% or higher. So everything has to be taken in light of your own health. And obviously, the healthier you are, the less likely it is that you'll fall into that mortality rate. The other thing that's important to know is the average time from the onset of symptoms. So after the incubation period, you start getting symptoms. Well, how long does it take to recover? Well, for the 80% that will have mild cases, it's approximately 2 weeks. For those patients who are more severe or critical, it could be 3 to 6 weeks. But usually within 2 weeks to 6 weeks, people will get over it. And for the 2 or 3% that have critical conditions, then during that time that they could actually succumb to the disease. And that's obviously where the fear is coming from. Now, if someone has been diagnosed with COVID-19 and they've had their 2 or 3 days of symptoms and then they clear up, well, to be considered cleared of the problem, we'll say either 14 days after the onset of symptoms or 3 days after the resolution of your symptoms, whichever one is longer. That's when we consider it to be cleared. And so, as I was mentioning, there's a lot of changes that are happening. Yesterday, France came out to say that they've had 4 patients that were young people and that they all developed severe disease, which is rare. Usually young people are healthy, they don't get into severe disease. And all 4 of them had taken an anti-inflammatory like Aleve or Advil. And so they've made a recommendation, which at this point is being accepted by the world until we can prove otherwise, that if you have any concerns, don't take anti-inflammatories. Take Tylenol, but using anti-inflammatories like Aleve or Motrin or Advil could make things worse if someone does get exposed to the disease. So in conclusion, should we be worried? Well, worrying doesn't help. It's just going to create a panic. This is not World War Z. It's not I Am Legend movie. There's a threat there, but we need to understand the problem. And once we understand the problem, then it's easier to react rationally and not go out and buy thousands of rolls of toilet paper and bottled water without really knowing why, but because the guy next door did. Then we know that this is a threat. It's a threat that we're going to deal with. It's a threat that should completely delineate itself over the next few weeks to few months. It's not something that's going to last for years, but we just need to be careful. And the social distancing that we've been doing will definitely reduce the chance of the spread becoming exponential the way it has in Europe. And over the next few weeks, we'll know a lot better whether or not the threat has resolved. So I will now take any questions if anybody has any questions to ask.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. We have a question coming in from the audience. Is there anything we can do preventatively to prevent this virus from getting in, like vitamins, minerals, herbs, things of that nature?
If there are any vitamins that can help, it's unproven. Now, a lot of people believe highly in vitamins or supplements like turmeric and garlic, and they may be helpful. But for the average person, if you're healthy, if you don't have chronic medical conditions, I would just get good sleep, drink a lot of water, and just do the things that we know can make a difference to keeping the body healthy. And of course, if you're going to go in an area, if you need to go to the grocery store, then yes, it's a good idea to bring some alcohol wipes and just wipe down the handlebar on the cart or anything else that you might come in contact with. Masks are not necessary. And this is important to understand. You don't need to wear a mask. Wearing a mask, if someone's coughing in your eye, you're still going to get the disease. And so you don't need to wear a mask, but if you are sick, if you have the flu or you're not sure this is the disease, then yes, then you should definitely wear a mask. But then again, you shouldn't be going out to the store anyways. You should stay at home until your symptoms clear up to make sure that if in the unlikely case that you do develop the disease, that you don't spread it to other people.
Okay, great, thank you. And we have another question that just came in. How long is this pandemic going to take? Are we looking at weeks, months?
There's an interesting curve looking at a pandemic where how many cases you get, it keeps going up, and at some point it peaks and it starts coming down. Well, without social distancing, it's felt that it's going to go very high with a lot of deaths and it's going to come down quickly. With social distancing, they feel that what's going to happen is the curve is going to be a lot flatter. So fewer deaths, but much longer to actually have the issue resolved. So I would say probably within 1 or 2 months is when the fear, the need for isolation, for closing schools and work and all these things, I think over the next month or two is when things are going to start settling down and we'll be able to get back to our normal routines.
Excellent, thank you. And where can people contact you?
Probably email is a good way, or my website. My email is mark, M-A-R-C, @drkayem.com, drkayem.com. And my website is www.drkayem.com.
Great, thank you so much.
All right, thank you. I will pass you back to Erin. Have a good night and stay safe.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kayem, for that wonderful piece of information on how we can manage some of the issues that we're dealing with right now as it relates to this pandemic. So what I really want to talk about, actually, I'm going to piggyback on the question that was asked about vitamins. So I have several healthcare professionals that I work with and people who are very knowledgeable in this field who I've read some of their posts and I've been staying on top of this, and several of them are recommending things like vitamin C, vitamin D3, magnesium, zinc, selenium. So those are just some different options that people might want to consider. And that information, like I said, is coming from some really great sources, some holistic healthcare providers that I do work with very closely and trust very much. So now I am going to talk a little bit about some of the, let's call them emotional and cognitive and stress related issues that are coming up sort of as a byproduct of learning about this virus and how much it is impacting life for everybody all over the world. So we're really living in this climate of fear and uncertainty right now. So I wanted to help a little bit and talk to you about what happens when we have fear. And I'm going to speak about this based on my knowledge in the field of neuroscience. I run a neurofeedback clinic. I'm the director of this clinic, and I deal with children who have different neurocognitive issues, adults with different mental health and neurocognitive issues. And I feel like I can impart some of my knowledge to people to help them deal with the stress of all of this. So fear is really, the initial response, and fear leads to this chain reaction. So it leads to stress, anxiety, emotional instability, worry. And for some people, this can be as significant as, a post-traumatic stress response. And so we're really talking about global issues with your social emotional states, your mood states, your emotional regulation states, as well as your cognitive states. And when I say cognitive states, that has to deal more with your ability to make logical, rational decisions. So how do we handle this fear? So first, we have a physiological response to fear and stress. So we release all these chemicals into our body, and it causes our heart rate to go up. So we have a racing heart, causes some respiratory, we're breathing fast, we sweat. So these are what we consider physiological responses. And that's the body's way of preparing itself to handle danger, really, to handle dangerous situations. So everything gets alerted. It's like an alerting mechanism. But then there's another side of the stress response, and that is what I'm going to call a neurological response. And that means a couple of different things. And I'm going to talk about those different things. So in our lower brain structures, we have these organs, these brain structures that cause a fight-flight response. And everybody knows what fight-flight means. It's that alerting mechanism that sends you into protecting yourself. It's like a survival mode. So we're all thrust into survival mode. And I feel like initially when this all came out, everybody was sort of feeling it out, and there wasn't this huge response, which I would consider fight flight. And then Disney closed, happiest place on the planet, and then schools started closing, the NBA closed, and then all this professional sports followed. And that's when I feel like people went into fight flight mode. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what that means in the brain and in the body. So let's just take an example of what fight flight might look like. So imagine you are, it's nighttime, and you're walking alone somewhere. You're walking to your car from a restaurant or from a club. You're walking to your car and you hear something behind you, and you start to have a fear response, right? And so right away, you decide, I'm gonna run because I don't know what's behind me and I don't wanna be attacked, for instance. So that running, that response of taking off and running without really thinking about where I'm running, I'm just running away from what's behind me. That is what I'm talking about when I talk about a fight-flight response. So now, this fight-flight response comes from your very low primitive reflexive brain. We've got a bunch of structures in there that sort of push us into that space of survival. So anxiety in general can cause this same response, stress and anxiety. So you're watching the news and you're hearing all about the virus, which a lot of this information is very important. We need to be listening to it. But there's a degree to which we have to figure out how much information can my system take, how much information do I really need. And then you start hearing about all the closures, and then we become, I don't want to say obsessive, but we can become obsessive about what we're listening to. And so right away what happens is that those lower brain structures go into anxiety mode, and they trigger this stress response. And as I talked about, a little bit earlier, the physiology of this, we are starting to release all kinds of hormones like adrenaline and other things. These hormones can be a little bit toxic to our immune system, so they can weaken our immune systems. We don't want a weak immune system right now, because if we have a weak immune system, as you know from what you've heard on the news, you become more susceptible and more vulnerable to viral infections and all kinds of things. And right now, that's what we do not want. So stress leads to a brain response, leads to the release of hormones that are not good for our immune system. So if we just take that in and of itself, we have to stop and say, okay, there are some things we can control. Okay, we can't control the spread of this virus, but we can control our response to the pandemic. And so I am trying to impart this knowledge to everybody to say, okay, yes, we need to worry. Yes, we need to wash our hands. Yes, we need to be mindful. But the more we put this kind of anxiety and stress into our systems, the more susceptible we're going to become. And so these systems that live deep in our brain are very fragile to stressful situations like this. They not only control this anxiety response that I'm talking about, but they also control emotional reactions, which is mood. So when we talk about that, we talk about depression, susceptibility to depression, mood swings, anger, just overall regulation. These are the systems that are so important to monitor how we're taking in information from the environment and sending it up to the thinking brain, right? So we really need to be cautious about our stress levels and our fear levels, because that can snowball and that can lead to all kinds of dysregulation, which is what I'm really talking about. The emotional brain, the brain that's afraid, the stressed brain, when that is terrified or frightened, the thinking brain becomes helpless. And so our ability to make the crucial decisions that we really need to make when we're managing situations like this, that ability goes way down. And so our lower fight-flight brain is connected to our higher thinking brain. And if that thinking brain can't do its job, then we become completely reliant on that low brain, which is just gonna, it's just a stress response. It's reflexive, it's knee-jerk, it's impulsive. It's not thinking things through. So again, we really want to stay on top of our levels of stress and anxiety. And the goal is to maximize our brain and body health so that we can manage this situation with a clear head. So I'm calling that higher cognitive capacity, I'm calling that your clear head, right? Your ability to focus and make good decisions, to stay motivated when faced with a very difficult challenge like this. How do we stay motivated so that we say, you know what, we can move forward as a community, we can support each other, and we can move forward, and we can make rational decisions, and we can not survive this. We don't only want to survive this, we want to thrive through this. And we can, if we be mindful, if we're mindful of how much stress and anxiety we're allowing to enter our bodies and affect us in a very negative way. So with that being said, I am trying to help my community humanity, anybody who needs the support from a mental health standpoint, social emotional standpoint. I want to be able to provide some type of service. I want to do what I can do. So I'm offering, consultations to anybody who feels that they're in a situation where some of this rings true and they want the help. Those consultations don't have to be in person. I understand that people are afraid to go out, and that is a real fear. But again, let's try to moderate that. Let's try to contain that. And if that means speaking to somebody who knows something about this and what it can do to us, both cognitively, psychologically, and physically, then I'm making that available to everybody. Because we are going to get through this. We will get through this. And we need to take care of ourselves and our families. And there are ways to do this that you all can have success with if you're given the proper guidance. So that's all I have to say today about this pandemic. And like I said, I am available to people who are in need. You can go to my website, neurozonewave.com. You can get in touch with me. You can email me, Erin@neurozonewave.com or erinbedore@gmail.com. And I will be more than happy to reach out and support you in any way that I can. And so now I'm going to open it up for questions so that I can answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Erin. We have a question. How can neurofeedback help with anxiety and fear? How does that work?
So neurofeedback is really a cognitive behavioral strategy that we sort of mediate through some really great technology, where we can, through our testing, which is called brain mapping or QEEG testing, we can actually get some information about the functional aspects of your brain. It's not structural in nature. So for situations like this, we're able to see that stress response in the brain and how it impacts brain function, because we are able to read the connections that happen between those lower brain structures that I was talking about, the fight-flight brain, and the higher thinking brain, the cognitive brain. And so through the testing, we see what's going on, we see what those connections look like, and then we can determine, is this a stress response? And then through our treatment, we can decrease the stress response, the anxiety response, and help promote more efficient connections in the brain, and help decrease the emotional dysregulation, which might look like depression, the stress response, the anxiety response, and we also can handle the post-traumatic stress response as well, which is on the severe end of the continuum of what kinds of symptoms people are having.
Great. Another question, how many sessions are needed to see results with anxiety?
That's really dependent upon what the testing looks like. So we do the testing, we get all this great information. We do some cognitive performance-based measures in addition to the QEEG test. 25 sessions is, we go in phases, so 25 sessions is the first phase of treatment. And once I get the test results, I have a pretty good idea of how long it's going to take. On average, you're looking at probably about 50 sessions, but it's really dependent on how long, this stress response has been occurring in the brain. And we have some really, really good data on prefrontal cortex function, which is the frontal part of the brain. And, looking at those loops and links between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, which is the low brain structures I keep talking about, we have solid research that tells us that with prolonged exposure to stress, you have cognitive changes, such as memory changes, changes in attention and focus, changes in executive function, which is planning, goal-directed behavior, forethought, motivation. We have clear data that shows the longer that stress response lives in the brain, the higher the propensity towards permanent cognitive shift. I shouldn't say permanent, but definite cognitive shift that can then be looked at, studied, and changed back to original states through things like neurofeedback and some other things that we can do. So we already know what this stress anxiety response does to your functional capacity to perform regular cognitive tasks, like the tasks that are required of you for work, for instance, for solving problems. So it's really important that we sort of navigate these stress responses, these anxiety responses, so that we don't end up with some, cognitive shifting that then requires some sort of intervention. And again, we can intervene. Neurofeedback is an organic-based treatment. We're not putting electrical energy into the brain in any way, shape, or form. It's all behavioral in nature. And so, these are some of the tools that that we have out there that are alternatives to taking medications and adding more medication to your, if you're already taking them, or if you want to avoid medication. This is really a nice way to handle such issues in a very organic, non-invasive way.
Great. And the last question we have, where is your clinic, and is it safe to come for neurofeedback during this time?
Great question. So we are maintaining regular clinic hours because I'm finding that my patients, my current caseload is needing this type of intervention. We are obviously, as usual, we are maintaining the highest standards of disinfecting everything and providing hand sanitizer and all kinds of things in our clinic settings. We have a clinic in Playa del Rey, which is adjacent to LAX. And our second clinic is in Redondo Beach. It's very convenient to the South Bay population of people and people coming down from Palos Verdes. So both of those clinics will be running regular hours. We also run Saturday hours, but with people taking time off work and kids being out of school, I'm finding that the clinic is fully functional during regular business hours, and the Saturdays are not being used up as much right now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So that's, thank you again for joining me, and I hope this was helpful. I hope you were able to get some good information. And again, feel free to reach out. I am available to support you in any way that I possibly can.